Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. In this episode, we will be discussing how Watchtower's woefully inadequate child abuse policies are increasingly giving the organisation a bad name in Europe, especially in the three European nations, Norway, Finland, and the Netherlands. But first, allow me to introduce our panel, which in this episode is comprised of John Redwood, Covert Fade, and newcomer to the show, fellow ex-witness YouTuber Evelyn de la Ombra. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks.
Hello,
Hi.
everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Now, you must just bear with me because I am having problems with my audio. I have that awful thing where you get the audio feedback and you're hearing yourself a few seconds afterwards. I'm still trying to get to the grips with live streaming. So allow me to sort that out, which I have now done. Now
We're doing it live, folks. We're doing it live.
and we don't get the wonderful intro and outro, and that will also impact the show when we do Covert Fade introduces the news, which I'm very sad to say. Yeah, I'm sorry. But returning to the subject at hand, for episode 10 of Watchtower in Focus, you may remember that we focused on what's happening in the Netherlands, and to help us with that, we were joined by Raymond Hintjes from Reclaimed Voices. Raymond has been good enough to come back for this show, episode 13. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, John.
So, Raymond, the last we heard, your organization had accumulated a number of survivors to represent. In fact, it was somewhere in the region of 200, 250. I believe the number has gone up since then. Mm-hmm. And with this huge number of survivors, you were applying pressure on the organization in the Netherlands to the point where the Dutch government was debating whether to have an investigation. From that point, can you bring us up to date with what's been happening?
Okay, of course I can. What is happening is that Watchtower representatives were invited by the Dutch Department of Justice and Safety, to have discussions about this independent investigations. And at one point, Watchtower representatives told to certain officials that a representative from the United States would join them in one of the dialogues. And as far as I know right now, that this dialogue took place a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And after that, Arwin and Frank, that are my two board members of Reclaimed Voices, had another conversation with Dutch officials. And they also informed about the dialogues and what they talked about. But the officials are at the moment not telling us what happened, since they need to inform the Dutch politicians of this commission first before they can tell us what actually has been talked about. We had raised our concerns, since it's quite obvious that Watchtower is avoiding any contact with us. We are certain victims, survivors of child abuse, asked for their documents by our lawyer. And at one point, our lawyer told us that we could send ID cards or passports to Watchtower, since they asked for it. And our lawyer was quite sure that we could handle that ourselves. But then Watchtower was complaining that a third party was involving and asking for those documents.
The third party being Reclaimed Voices.
Yeah, Reclaimed Voices, but actually it was Reclaimed Voices all the time by their lawyer to ask for the documents, and Reclaimed Voices is acting on behalf of survivors of child abuse.
So just to clarify, Watchtower was asking the abuse victims for their passports and ID cards to authenticate their identity.
Exactly.
Right.
But since usually that is not necessary if a legal representative, a lawyer asks for documents, it is not necessary that he supplies the ID cards or passports. But Watchtower was insisting on it. So at one point we thought, okay, we can complain about this, but probably that would not be in our it would not be it would only delaying the process if we would not comply. So we did, and we did that by sending the passports by Reclaimed Voices, not by the lawyer, but by Reclaimed Voices. And then there was a complaint sent to the lawyer about a third party. We were not mentioned. And so we decided to write another letter, and a second open letter. So we sent it first to Watchtower, and then we tried to publish it in the Dutch media. It took about a week, and then the Dutch media published the letter in what we were asking why they were avoiding any contact with us, and if that could have to do anything with that we are ex-witnesses. Okay, and they gave some response in the media that they would not give any information about it in the media, and they were actually complaining that we were dealing with it in media and to try to be open and transparent about it. And actually last week we received a letter, and in this letter they actually are stating that they will not enter.
You have the letter there, so you can just show the viewers.
Here. Yes, I have the letter here.
Yeah.
That they will not enter in any dialogue with us, and that individual victims of sexual abuse could contact them, and that an experienced elder will probably listen to them or take some shepherding care. But
so they are telling literally hundreds of abuse survivors who have been let down by elders that the thing they need to do is contact an elder.
Exactly, that is what they are saying. And it's quite astonishing that they are actually stating this in a letter. So now it is actually as a proof that we can use in our contact with Dutch officials. I have contacted some Dutch officials today, and there will be another conversation with Dutch officials and politicians about this, since it is only proving that our concerns that a Watchtower will not comply and will not will not be in any case reasonable or helpful in this independent investigation, and that probably some other actions need to take place for to force a Watchtower to give some to force the Watchtower to do something about this situation.
So it's fair to say that so far Watchtower is being very dismissive of your role in the whole situation.
Yes.
But you're telling us that you have another meeting lined up with the government, who are taking your involvement very seriously.
Yes, they are. Yes.
You also mentioned earlier that a number of survivors who you represent had formally requested records about their abuse from Watchtower. Are you able to give us some idea of the numbers who requested?
13 people did request, and I Today, someone told me that he contacted Watchtower directly in asking how many time it would take for Watchtower to handle over the records. And Watchtower is saying now that it will take another 2 weeks.
So of those 13 people who have requested records of their abuse, how many have received their records of abuse?
At the moment, no one did, and they are still dealing with it. Since it took so long a time for Watchtower to actually start to collect all the information that they have, since they were only delaying the process till now. And finally, about 2 weeks ago, they confirmed that they will handle over the records. So, according to European law, it will take about 4 weeks that they need for them to handle over the records. So another 2 weeks, and then the records are expected. We don't know what they actually will give to us, but probably it will not be much helpful information.
But really, they could have handed over the records already.
Yes, of course they can.
Doesn't say a lot about them if they're playing to the deadlines. I'm just going to open things up to our panel. Covert, John and Evelyn, this does sound very familiar with the sort of evasive behavior that we're familiar with now with Watchtower's handling of these issues.
It really is, and it must be absolutely baffling to the Dutch media and to the Dutch government ministers who are having to deal with this, because you would expect a situation where a religious organization is accused of having serious problems in dealing with child sex abuse, and there is an organization of survivors got together, and the obvious thing is to say, okay, well, the religious organization needs to talk to the organization of survivors, and there needs to be a conversation about this. And it must be so puzzling for the Dutch media and the Dutch ministers to sort of say, to try and understand why won't Watchtower even meet with the survivors? Why won't they meet with this organization? Even if the purpose of the meeting is for Watchtower to try and say, well, to defend its policies or to defend what it's doing, it seems bizarre that the organization wouldn't even have a meeting in order to wish to do that. And I think what we're starting to see here is, hopefully, the Dutch government will start to see what they're actually dealing with, because obviously as former Jehovah's Witnesses, we know the almost pathological aversion with which Watchtower treats an ex-witness, especially one who is publicly critical or confrontational of the organization. And I think Watchtower often tries to downplay that, and Watchtower very much likes to give, try and hide that aspect of what it does. But it seems like we're getting to a crunch point now where Watchtower won't be able to hide anymore the fact that it simply refuses to almost acknowledge the existence of ex-witnesses in this context, and won't meet them for specifically religious reasons.
Indeed.
Raymond, I'd like to ask you a question. The attorneys for Reclaim Voices that represent the victims, they've gone to Watchtower and they've requested in, I think you said, approximately 13 cases. They've made the request for documents. Watchtower's turned over none of those documents. But have those victims also contacted the congregations which also have these files, and have any of the congregations turned over the files?
No, they didn't. We discussed this with Nico Meiring, the attorney of the victims, if it would be wise to do this. And at the moment, we thought that it would be easier to have a central point to turn to. So none of them did actually contact the congregations. And since it is for some victims many years ago that they were even JWs, some of those congregations will not exist anymore. So who to turn to is another question then.
Right. So that really asks the question of what happened to those files, and can Watchtower answer, or can the local congregations answer for whether or not those files were destroyed, And in accordance with what procedure were they destroyed? Are they destroyed after 10 years, 15 years, or when the congregation is dissolved? Because normally you would have a procedure in place when a congregation is dissolved as to what happens to those congregation documents. And maybe we can petition the court or petition Watchtower to find out where those congregation documents would go.
It would be
nice.
would be nice and a good thing to think about and to discuss and to get some legal advice on. I think that at the moment, okay, we till now, I think that we were still very patient about in the whole process. But since we see that Watchtower is not very helpful in this, I'm quite sure, and I talked to some victims, that they will take any legal action that is needed to get all the information they actually want, or they need to start perhaps a legal process in this case.
I mean, it does seem, Raymond, that Reclaimed Voices has really gone out of their way to act in good faith. As you say, when Watchtower demanded, they wanted to see passports and identification. The victims didn't actually, you said that's not a legal recommendation, but the survivors and Reclaimed Voices said, okay, if that's what you want, we'll do this. We'll meet you halfway. There's like a willingness to meet Watchtower halfway on this.
Exactly.
And it seems that even when the survivors are saying to Watchtower, okay, we'll meet you halfway, Watchtower's trying to make it as difficult as possible. It seems to be very transparent, as you're saying, that they're just trying to throw up barriers to delay the process as much as they can.
I just think that they seem to be wanting to play it from both sides. They're wanting to use theocracy on one side and say that elders, but then they're wanting to hide behind the law in another way, yet they're not willing to do what they are always preaching, which is to give Caesar's things to Caesar. And so if we're talking about in a legal perspective, they should actually be, when under the law, if they're asked for things that they're not sort of, these records shouldn't be anything that they should be ashamed to produce if they're doing everything that is for the benefit, and whether it be spiritually or whether it be physically, of the victims. So there shouldn't be a problem. So, but they're playing both sides of the argument, using spirituality on one side and then legal arguments, and also, leaving things to the very last minute. And they once again show they're very arrogant in that they feel that they should be able to do this. And I understand why the politicians, must be really confused, because if they've had no dealings with the Watchtower, previously, it is actually unfathomable. I've never come across another organization quite like the Watchtower when it comes to being awkward, dealing with anybody that's not, a member of the organization.
Indeed. Well observed. We've been having some interesting comments in the live chat. Lynn Gardner says, never thought to ask for my records. I'll do so quickly before they did try them. I think there's been a typo there. Headstarter says, it's sad over here in Australia. Some need to get a court order to get paperwork off the cult. Sam says, Watchtower is a coward organization. And AskPot1 says, I find it incredible that an organization priding themselves in having and speaking the truth is so good in bending it, which is more or less what Evelyn was just saying. Faye Dare says, is there an opportunity for a global Reclaimed Voices? Has anyone already started such a thing? We were debating this actually almost in the last time we had Raymond on the channel. It would be a good thing. One thing that I did want to kind of revisit with you, Raymond, was the extraordinary footage that we saw in the Dutch Parliament when we were going over episode 10, because there really was some extraordinary reactions from some of the politicians who you could tell were viscerally appalled at what Watchtower was doing. On the other hand, you seem to have the prosecutor who almost seemed to be trying to play devil's advocate for Watchtower to some degree. Is there still that kind of dynamic? Is there still the impetus in the Dutch government to do something here, or is there frustration that things are taking this long?
Of course, there is a frustration that things are taking this long, but we also know that doing things by getting the politicians in one direction and it's a very long way to go. Politics is usually not the most fastest process. What we see is we collected some reports, then some victims also filed reports, and we collected them, and our lawyer sent it in those reports to this prosecutor. But what she actually did was spreading all the individual reports to the local departments of the police, and that makes the case not that strong, since this the reports.
So rather than dealing with it as a Watchtower issue, they were dealing with it kind of separating it into individual criminal cases.
Yeah, individual criminal cases, and then you have a case against the perpetrator. But in our situation, we think that it is not only a case against a perpetrator, but it's a case against an organization who is protecting perpetrators and not protecting children.
Yeah.
And then we have the way by the Dutch politics. Some politicians filed in some motions. 3 motions were presented. One motion about an independent investigation into Watchtower organization. This motion is kept till the conversation that has taken place with the ministry. And then another motion was about changing the law, that not only sex offenses, sex crimes for in a certain degree are obligated to report, but that all kinds of serious crimes needed to be reported to the police. And the third one was that not only Watchtower, but also other religious organizations should be investigated if they have those internal systems of dealing with certain cases. And the other 2 motions about investigation into all religions and in changing the law are accepted. And the third one is kept and need to be a vote on. And I don't know when it will be, but in my next dialogue with this politician, Michiel van Nispen, he can tell me when he will, when the vote on this motion will be.
How optimistic are you at the chances of an investigation of Jehovah's Witnesses and child sex abuse?
I think that at the end, Dutch society, Dutch politics, and even the Dutch Department of Justice will not accept that Watchtower Society will not or will not be helpful in this investigation. So an investigation will be taking place in the end, but it will not be that fast as we hoped. I think that it will be some way next year, probably in the spring or summer, till we have certainty on if an investigation will take place and how that is, how this will be done.
So there's a long road ahead, but promising strides being made. What we're going to do now is we're going to expand our perspective on the issue of child abuse, mishandling by Jehovah's Witnesses to other countries in Europe. And I know, John Redwood, you have been keeping tabs on developments in Norway.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit going on in Norway, and what I find really interesting is the fact that the story actually broke out of a different country, which led to the child abuse investigations in Norway. And what I mean by that is back in April 13th, I shared this, I think, on a recent episode. We had a major newspaper in Norway release an article that was an expose of child sexual abuse cover-up that took place. But it started over in Spain when a woman back in, I believe, 2014 took her child or left her child home alone with the child's grandparents. And the grandmother went to sleep. The grandfather, who was an appointed elder and had been for many years, I think he was in his upper 70s at that point, began sexually abusing the child. And mom came home, and mom walked in and caught him sexually abusing her daughter. And she immediately contacted the police. Now, these are all Jehovah's Witnesses. And as I mentioned, the man who was the abuser was an elder. He has since been disfellowshipped. But the police were contacted. This was in a remote town in Spain. And ultimately, the man went to prison. But what happened was during the investigation, it was uncovered that back in Norway, where he is from, remember, he was a pensioner in Spain, but he was from Norway, had lived there for decades. It came to light that he had abused multiple children throughout the course of many decades. And they began asking other people who, this was his third marriage, so they started with his previous wives. And as they started interviewing them, they recognized that all of these children or stepchildren who had contact with this man that we're calling the elder had been abused by him. And so for those that obviously don't read Norwegian, this article in the Southern Norwegian newspaper, it's the largest newspaper in Norway, we'll post a link to it, but about a week and a half later, they published an article in English simply called The Elder. So this man was put in prison. He's been in prison for several years now. I think he has another year or two on his term. But what's interesting is the fact that, of course, the mom who married this man had been given no warning whatsoever about this man. She didn't know what he was like, that he had touched other children. All of that had been covered up back in Norway. And so now the investigation is opening up in Norway. And what we're finding is that there are additional cases that are about to be exposed. And I can't comment on the specifics, but the Norwegian journalist who produced this article, he couldn't be with us today because he's about to uncover another investigation in which they're trying to interview additional elders that were involved in the child abuse cover-up in Norway. So suffice it to say, very much like what Raymond's describing over in the Netherlands is also and has been going on in Norway. And the sad thing about it is that it's been going on for decades. It reminds me of my own, case here in the East Coast of the United States where we had people that we're finding out now had abused children for decades, and the elders knew about it, but covered it up, swept it under the rug, never contacted the police. And as a result, dozens and dozens of children were abused by the same perpetrator. So the same thing's going on in Norway. And, we're certain that not only will the perpetrators be brought to justice, and this is a great example of that, because this man was indeed brought to justice. But sadly, it was because he was caught in the act, and he actually admitted to the abuse, which is the only reason that he was imprisoned, was that there was an admission of guilt. He has since later recanted his story, and he actually had the nerve to say that they got it wrong, that there was a mistranslation between the translator who was in Spanish or in Spain, and he was speaking in Norwegian. It's
which just goes to highlight how conniving these individuals are when it comes to trying to cover their tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can really tell just how evil these men are. Later in the article known as The Elder, which was the one produced in English, the journalist actually got in contact with the perpetrator's attorney, because the perpetrator's obviously in prison. He wouldn't speak to them, but he sent a message back to the journalist through his attorney. And I can't say it in live stream here, but you know, I can say that he told the journalist to go F themselves, and that's actually in the article. You can read that. We'll post a link to it. So yeah, it's really tragic what's happening in such a small country, where there really, I think, are less witnesses there than there are in the Netherlands. Yet there's rampant child sexual abuse, and worse yet, there's a cover-up.
Just picking up on the live chat, thank you for that summary, John. JF Nilsson, who I think is Norwegian, or certainly from a Scandinavian country, judging by the name, says the Spanish court system and police were never told about the Norwegian victims. That's an important point. Thank you for that clarification.
That's right.
Yeah. Mike Baker says it's all about not bringing reproach on God's name. They are obsessed with this particular sin, or its ongoing juggle with handling abuse allegations. Stacey Sivonen says it is too weird to be true. It is Watchtower. Nikki Pagnotta, Watchtower is a bully, enemy of human rights. Kimberly O'Donnell, a friend of the show, says a global reclaimed voices would be brilliant. Merrill Barnes says it seems like we're in an ongoing Twilight Zone episode. Watchtower continues to hurt people and gets away with it. Do you think they will ever be brought to justice? And Mike Baker says, slowly but surely, they are and will answer for all their crimes. Speaking of these crimes, we move to another country, and Covert Fade is going to tell us what's been happening in Finland.
Right, so we're going to go to Finland for our next part of this, as you say, Lloyd. And it's interesting because what we're going to see is it seems like there's a similar pattern of events happening in Europe right now. And as I go through kind of these articles, you're going to see some similarities to what's happening in the Netherlands. So in Finland in March, there was a news article on the YLE news media site, and I apologize if I mispronounce any of this. My Finnish is rather terrible. I don't speak it very well, or at all, in fact.
Honestly, amateurs on this show. Terrible. You just cannot get the staff.
Terrible. So we're gonna have to put up with my terrible pronunciation. But the Finnish League for Human Rights actually commented on there was a series of interviews on the YLE studio, which I believe were very similar to the exposure that the media in the Netherlands did, where they interviewed multiple former Jehovah's Witnesses who said they had been prevented from reporting child abuse to the authorities, that these crimes were instead handled by internal courts. Basically, the exact same pattern that we see repeating time and time again in multiple countries is happening in Finland. What happened in Finland was that, again, all these media reports came out, and there was some pressure applied by an organization called the League for Human Rights. And as a result of this, in March, the Interior and the Justice Ministry and the Ministry of Education and Culture said they had, so this is the government, said they had requested a report from the Jehovah's Witnesses explaining their activities. Now, I've got no further updates on this story. I don't know what's happening on this. And I want to give, obviously, you can find this article if you Google Jehovah's Witnesses Child Abuse Finland. I actually saw it on the XJW Reddit, so that's always an excellent resource for up-and-coming JW news articles. So that was in March, but what we actually had a few days ago, and I think this actually happened in April, but I only became aware of it a few days ago, and again, it was through the XJW Reddit, is that a Finnish TV station, which is the ILTALEHTI.FI station, and I've tweeted this link, and it's on XJW, so you can find it, held an interview. And it's a studio interview, and they first interviewed a former Jehovah's Witness who was a survivor of child sex abuse inside the Jehovah's Witness religion. And then they interviewed, and this is kind of what surprised me, they actually got a member of the Finnish Watchtower branch to appear for an interview. Now, this astonished me because it's been virtually impossible for journalists in the UK, in the USA, and many other places to get a member of Watchtower's branch office to kind of even comment on anything, let alone sit down for a live interview. Usually what will happen is Watchtower will issue that default cookie cutter statement, which is like a copy and paste, and doesn't actually really address any specific claims that are made against it in any way. So this was the first thing that dropped my jaw. I was like, I'm not sure I've seen that before, or if it has happened, I haven't seen it very regularly. But the second thing, and this is why this really relates to what's happening in the Netherlands right now, and the issues that Reclaim Voices are getting, even getting a meeting in the same room with Watchtower, is that there is a photo taken for this Finnish interview that has the Watchtower representative on one side of the news reporter, and then the victim stood on the other. So here we have a situation where the Watchtower branch official did meet the victim, albeit maybe just for the purposes of a photo, but was prepared to stand in the same room as the victim. And I've not seen that before, because it's such a contrast to we've seen time and time again that Watchtower has this almost phobia of being within 50 feet of anyone who they consider an apostate. And my understanding is that this woman was the survivor was baptized and had left, so was the definition of a Watchtower apostate. Now, sadly, the interview is entirely in Finnish, and the news article doesn't have much text surrounding it, so I couldn't really do a Google Translate. So I don't know the substance of what was said. And I'm sure that if there's anyone who speaks Finnish, they can provide a translation. So I may have the wrong end of the stick on a few things. But what we know for certain is we have a situation where a member of the Finnish branch office is appearing for a live interview, which I've never seen before, and also was apparently quite happy to stand and pose for a photograph with an apostate, inverted commas, who is also a survivor of child sex abuse. So as far as I can see, either the Finnish branch has gone rogue and is doing things very much different from everyone else, or Watchtower's policy of handling this appears to be very much a strange patchwork, because I've not seen this in any other branch or in any other country. And it seems strange that in the Netherlands they're jumping through hoops not to be in the same room as survivors and Reclaim Voices. But in Finland, they're doing TV interviews and taking photographs with survivors. So I'm confused.
Yeah, it was really odd because obviously you tweeted about this, and we follow each other quite closely on Twitter, and I could not believe that you had a Watchtower representative stood not quite shoulder to shoulder, but certainly in the same frame as an apostate. I can't believe that sort of thing would be given the green light from Warwick if permission were to be asked. Yeah, astonishing to consider that you might potentially have individual branches starting to do their own thing to some extent, and quite frankly, who could blame them, because it's them that carry the can if there's an investigation. Well,
this is the thing. I mean, I actually tweeted. I actually applauded that branch member for doing that, because I'm sure that what he said in that interview was, he was trying to justify Watchtower's policies, but the simple fact of the matter that he was prepared to face an interview and answer questions, and also prepared to, as far as I can see, meet a victim, is miles above what I've seen before from branch representatives. So I was like, it's a baby step, but it's a baby step down the right road. So I actually sort of tweeted, I think that's, we want to encourage more of this from Watchtower. I mean, it might be that this guy is now getting keelhauled by Brooklyn Bethel, and that, Tony Morris has gone to find his biggest, baddest hitting stick to punish this guy with. But, but yeah.
I think you bring up an interesting point, Covert, because we've seen the consolidation of branches in the past 10 or 12 years with Watchtower. It happened with the German Bethel, with some of the South American ones, but also with Scandinavia. So, and perhaps Raymond can correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand the Scandinavian branches, such as Finland and Norway and Iceland and so forth, they used to all have their own individual branches, so they were tightly controlled. However, some years ago, they were disbanded. Those branches were disbanded, and they were placed under the Denmark branch. And so I believe that could have an impact on how they address things locally. Maybe Raymond has an idea about that.
I know that it's true that all Scandinavian branches are under the Danish branch, but I don't know if that is also true for the Finnish branch.
I think Finland has its own branch.
Finland has still its own branch, and that they act quite in a different way. That's true, and it's also strange to me. I have no explanation why they actually dealing with this case in this way. So what will happen? I don't know exactly. I have no idea.
Going to the live chat, we actually have a question for Raymond, which I will come to later when we do the roundup. But Jace Winter says, hopefully other governments follow the Dutch lead and do investigation as well. Obviously, the investigation isn't a foregone conclusion yet, but it's very encouraging to see them moving in that direction. Nikki Pagnotta says, Watchtower must submit to the authorities. Romans 13, 1-7, lets everyone be subject to the authorities. It is interesting that the Watchtower, however, refuses to abide by their own teachings. Merrill Barnes says, my cousin was molested by her stepfather from age 2 to age 16. Elders told my aunt to stay with him. It wasn't reported to police, and my cousin had to move out of the house. Incredible and disturbing to consider just how many stories there are like that once we start to scratch beneath the surface. Trust Olu says, this is what you get when you have an insular group of people who are groomed to forego all critical thinking and give blind obedience. Ex-TJ girl says, it obviously has to be reported. And Kimberly O'Donnell, again, a friend of the show, says, when I was abused and drinking the Kool-Aid, I did not know it was a worldwide problem. If I had known, I may have left sooner. Victims are brave for speaking up and others for supporting them. So what we're going to do now is go to Evelyn, because Evelyn, by the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to Evelyn's YouTube channel, you absolutely should. Evelyn has actually recently started making videos with her real appearance. It was the case, wasn't it, Evelyn, that you were working under a pseudonym and you were just doing audio only videos. You've recently bloomed onto the camera, and I will be putting a link to your channel in the description. So please check out Evelyn. But one of the videos that Evelyn did recently was she kind of jumped on something that I was kicking myself that I just didn't quite have the time to do. It was a document that appeared on jw.org, is in fact downloadable from that website, called Jehovah's Witnesses' Scripturally Based Position on Child Protection. Evelyn, what can you tell us about this document?
Well, there's a couple of things in the document on first reading that surprised me in a good way. But as always, when it comes to things written by the Watchtower, they're written in a slippery sort of way. It's not just straightforward. I've got it up on my computer here, so I'm just going to quickly see if I can. I mean, for instance, they state in their third point that Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and view it as a crime. Great. So at least that they've stated that straight on. But then in the next, let me see, is it the next one? Yeah, it says that the everybody, victims, their parents have the right to report to the authorities. It's like, well, that's big of them to, you know, sort of allow the victims to do this. I mean, it shouldn't actually be a case of them saying that they have the right to. It should be a case of them actually saying that they must, because if they admit that these things are crimes, then they should be encouraging everybody to just go straight to the police when it comes to anything like this. But then it goes on. Now let me see. There was You'll have to excuse me because I didn't know that I was coming on this until the very last minute.
Evelyn has come to the rescue.
So
can I just, while you kind of compose yourself,
okay.
I just want to, because I will drop a link for viewers to download this document. What I found astonishing was paragraph 5, because the document sets out to present this image of Watchtower taking child abuse seriously as a crime. So you're thinking, okay, if you take something seriously as a crime, then whether it's murder, whether it's rape, whether it's theft, you go to the authorities. Try and read this paragraph and substitute child abuse for murder and see how it sounds. When elders learn of an accusation of child abuse, they immediately consult with the branch office of Jehovah's Witnesses to ensure compliance with child abuse reporting laws. Could you imagine saying that about murder? Well, we need to first check whether we need to comply with murder reporting laws. Even if the elders have no legal duty to report an accusation to the authorities, the branch office of Jehovah's Witnesses will instruct the elders to report the matter if a minor is still in danger of abuse or there is some other valid reason. So even there, they're not giving a copper-bottomed guarantee. And again, with murder, you have a murderer on the large who can murder someone else, but they're not quite applying that logic to a child molester who is at large. And it concludes by saying elders also ensure that the victim's parents are informed of an accusation of child abuse. If the alleged abuser is one of the victim's parents, the elders will inform the other parent. Again, I just found it astonishing, the fact that in one breath they can say, as they do in point 3, Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and view it as a crime. And then literally just a couple of paragraphs later, they're framing it in the context of, well, we might report it or we might not report it, depending on the circumstances.
And the thing in that paragraph 5 that struck me straight away was that they're taking it upon themselves, and they're giving the responsibility to the elders to make a decision whether somebody is still in danger, because they say that they will instruct the elders to report the matter if a minor is still in danger of abuse or if there's some other valid reason. They have no way, there is no way that anybody can ever know that. That's why you go to the police, because you can't know if there is anybody else going to be in danger. And when it comes to child abusers, when it comes to paedophiles, the fact that they exist on the planet means that there are always going to be people in danger. If they're not locked up away from everybody else, they're always going to be a danger to other people. So saying that, elders should be making this decision, I mean, it's insane, because I've done child safeguarding as part of training when I did some volunteer work, and I've never seen anything as ridiculous as this, because in all other safeguarding documents, it says that, there's no ifs or buts about it, and there's no making decisions about whether this or whether that. You just go to the police, or you inform whoever the person is in your small group within that organization, and you inform them, because it's their job to go to the police, and there's no delay. You just say, this is what I've been told, and you make the phone call, and then the police get involved, and they're the ones that can make decisions and can arrest people and investigate. But once again, the Watchtower is putting investigative sort of like responsibilities on elders, and they have no training. As far as I know, elders are not sent away for child safeguarding training, and they're not given any they don't have any proper investigative skills. So I don't know. It just makes no sense to me why they insist on using this obscure language instead of just being really, really clear about it and saying elders should go to the police.
Indeed.
One thing I think you brought out very well in your video, Evelyn, and I remember watching your video, and again, to anyone who hasn't seen it yet, it's an excellent analysis of this policy document. You pointed out that this document actually commits the elders to informing parents of minors if there is an abuser in the congregation in point 11.
Yeah.
And I found this actually quite fascinating now, because I don't know if Watchtower meant to do this, but if you're a parent you're in a congregation and you're watching this video, you have the right now to ask elders if they are aware of a molester in the congregation. If you have minor children, and according to this document, they're obligated to tell you.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not Watchtower will fulfill this obligation, I don't know. Whether or not the elders will actually fulfill this, but according to the policy that Watchtower has published online on its own website, it appears they would be obligated to tell you this.
Yeah. And something else is that, what do they mean by congregation? Because when they write letters, the Watchtower refers to the congregation of brothers, and they can be referring to whole districts or whole countries. So does this mean that if there is a perpetrator that is within a district or within a country, within a circuit, do the parents have the right to ask that as well? I mean, they should be able to, sort of know if they're going to a circuit assembly, if there are going to be paedophiles there. I mean, I'm a parent. I mean, and I wouldn't take my kids anywhere near any sort of gathering if I, knew that there were. And it just raises the question, how big is their commitment to actually fulfilling this, and who has the actual, is it just individual elders in congregations? Is there an actual procedure set up? Is it with circuit overseers? Who does this, and how do you go about getting this information? And it's something that all parents really need to know, and they really need to start asking this question to protect their children.
Indeed.
I'd like to mention that there's a statement in paragraph 4, which I feel is really a misleading statement. Paragraph 4 says that in all cases, victims and parents have the right to report an accusation to the authorities. And notice they say they don't suggest reporting it. They say that they have a right to report it. So the burden is always on the parents. But it goes on to say that elders do not criticize anyone who chooses to make such a report. And that's false unless you want to believe that they're separating congregation members and victims from the elders themselves, because we have hard evidence in the case, for example, of the UK, where they wrote a letter to the congregation outside of Dublin, Ireland, in which they sent a delegation to investigate 4 elders who spoke to the police about a child abuser who was living in a congregation just outside of Dublin. And they ended up removing both of those elders from their positions because those elders had gone against the direction, and they spoke to the police without permission from the branch office in London. We have evidence of this, and we also have the testimony from at least 2 of the elders themselves who approached some of us that work in this field between JW Survey and Avoid JW. So, it's lying to say that they don't criticize a person who makes such a report. They certainly go after any elder who does things outside of their direction.
Indeed. It's one thing to have a document that says, well, this is how we do things. It's another thing entirely to see how things actually end up happening, especially historically. And I think that would be one major criticism that I have of this document, is that it doesn't acknowledge what the changes have been. In other words, it doesn't say that at one point they did require abuse victims to confront their abuser. It just pretends that that never happened. In fact, just to kind of bring in some of the live chat comments, because people are following this discussion. In fact, let's just get a total on who's tuning in at the moment. So far, 261 are tuning into this episode. So thank you to all of you for following us live. David Taylor says, listening live for the first time, enjoying the conversation. Nikki Pagnotta says, elders are not trained professionals and obviously should not be in a position to make a decision about informing the authorities. Javier Ortiz, who is a friend of the show, says, Lloyd, can you flag on that new document what policy has changed or revised, and more or less when it changed? That's a good question, Javier. Again, there have been changes over the years. For example, abuse victims are no longer required to be questioned or in the presence of the abuser. However, it's a little hard to say exactly what dates these changes came into effect. I think the current document is pretty much what you would expect them to say. In other words, there were no surprises in this document. Pretty much
I'm actually
everything.
working on a JW survey article,
Fantastic.
which will go into that actually. So hopefully it'll be up soon.
I can also say that I've seen the Dutch letter to the body of elders that introduces this letter to the congregation, and that letter, it was stated that elders should stick to the instructions that were given in the 1st September 2017 letter. So this document is obviously a document that is for the public, for the media, for the publishers, but they have still other instructions, and that are in those elders letter of the 1st September 2017 letter that elders should stick to.
Indeed, and that's kind of one of the problems, is that you have multiple documents for multiple audiences. And quite frankly, if you're an elder and you have one document that's been written for the public and one document that's been written for elders, which document are you going to stick to? But just to kind of complete my thought, that I don't see anything really new in the document that's been released for the press. It just seems to be basically a clever way of selling the existing policy by mostly omitting some of the worst parts and dressing up in flowery language the fact that they don't report all instances of abuse to the authorities. Now, we could talk about this forever, I'm sure, but we really must get to the part of the show that everyone, and I mean everyone, has been looking forward to. It is, and I'm afraid we can't play the jingle, but it is Covert Fade introduces the news.
I'm going to do my own jingle. I need my jingle. Covert Fade introduces the news. Here we go. So I've got only one news article today, but it's actually it's related to what we've been talking about, but it goes quite wider as well. And it's actually a really good piece of news, because if you're familiar with kind of XJW activism or the history of people who've been exposing Watchtower's misconduct, you'll probably be familiar with the name Barbara Anderson. Now, Barbara is, she was a former Jehovah's Witness. She worked for a long time as a researcher and writer at Bethel, Watchtower headquarters. She was there from 1982 to 1992. And as in her position as a kind of a writer and researcher, moving with some of the kind of the real Watchtower hierarchy, she became aware of all these letters that were being written by JW child abuse victims and survivors who were still JWs, writing to the organization asking for help. And I'm not going to go into the whole story. If you go to watchtowerdocuments.org, you can read Barbara's entire story. But she was quite instrumental in trying to get the organization to take this issue seriously. And in the kind of between 1982 and 1992, you did start to see some efforts by the organization to kind of come to terms with this. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out the way it should. Ultimately, Barbara left the religion, and she again was one of the first people to really expose this problem to the news media. Well, she's actually got a book out. Barbara Anderson's Uncensored Eyewitness to Deceit is now available on Amazon. And there we go. John Redwood has a copy. He has a hard copy. It's in Kindle and paperback. And I'd really recommend getting hold of this, because it's not just about the child abuse issue. It goes a lot wider than that. It tells, Barbara's story. It also talks about other problems with the organization as well. But I mean, Barbara Anderson really is pivotal in terms of exposing this story. And also it's fascinating to read her account of what it was like to be in Bethel, trying to get people to take this story seriously. So that's my news article. That book is out. It's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, and I highly recommend picking up a copy.
Fantastic. We really must get Barbara Anderson on the show. Let us know what you think about that, viewers. I can see it happening. We'll certainly persevere in that direction, but let us know if you would like to see Barbara Anderson appear on Watchtower in Focus. But we reached the point in the show, we're already kind of over time where we plan to be. We're already coming up to the hour mark. So if we could just kind of conclude with some brief kind of summary comments from each of us. We'll begin with our special guest, Raymond. And Raymond, before I ask you to give your comments, allow me to read what one or two have been saying on the live chat. Faye Dare has said, "Hi, Lloyd and team. Would you mind if I posted a live survey so that viewers can indicate if they would support a global Reclaimed Voices?" And Jules Pate says, "Ask Raymond if Reclaimed Voices are prepared for the long haul in their campaign. They must be aware that this could be dragged out." Raymond, I'll let you respond to that.
Okay. I know that there's a lot of work done already in the Netherlands, since we are a few of us, and it's impossible for only a few people to deal with this issue on a worldwide scale. But I am happily if other people will start to their own chapters of Reclaimed Voices. So I also know that I think it's in the German-speaking countries, there's an organization active, JW Opferhilfe, JW Victim Help, that is dealing with all kind of cases of human rights issues and Jehovah's Witnesses, also sexual abuse issues. So yes, I think it would be a good idea if on a worldwide scale, victims, survivors and supporters will organize themselves to start to bring this issue under the scrutiny of their governments. But as I said, English is not my mother language, and you can hear that, of course. So we have a lot of work to do already in the Netherlands, and I'm quite helpful to share what we have done till now, and we have some conversations with different kind of people from different countries about it. But I would encourage them to organize themselves.
And what do you make of the question, are you in it for the long haul? Because this could potentially drag on for years. Yes,
I am, and we are as Reclaimed Voices. When I started it together with some other people, we already knew that this would not be for a year or 2 years.
Indeed. Covert, can we get your closing thoughts?
So I guess for me, I mean, I just want to thank Raymond for giving us that update, because it's fascinating to see how this is unfolding in the Netherlands. And for me, it's just interesting to see what happens when Watchtower is publicly held to account in this way, because it means they can't duck and dive in the way they usually do, or when they do, it's becoming obvious. So it's becoming completely obvious that Watchtower is not dealing with Reclaimed Voices in good faith, and that it's not been dealing with the Dutch government in good faith. And I think it's just a wonderful example of what happens when groups of survivors can get together, like Reclaimed Voices, and then the media can kind of help give a voice to what's going on, and then scrutinize, and government can get involved. And this kind of, they say the best way to deal with corruption is to shine a light on it. And it feels like in the Netherlands right now, there really is the start of shining a light on Watchtower, and they're going to have nowhere to hide. They may refuse to change things, and we will have to see what happens legally, but they won't be able to deny what they're doing. They won't be able to deny that they're acting in bad faith, that they are, treating survivors in this way. And I think the one thing that's coming out is it's obvious that Watchtower now views sexual abuse survivors not as survivors to be helped, but as opponents that they need to tactically outmaneuver. And I think they're kind of, they're shooting themselves in the foot, really.
That's a chillingly accurate way of putting it. And Evelyn, can we get your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they're really showing that when they can control the narrative, like with this new document that they put up, when it's specifically for a certain audience, for the media or for current JWs, they say one thing, but then when it comes to their actual actions, when it comes to the media trying to contact them with specific ones or in court cases, they just are showing themselves to be hypocrites every single time. And it's going to become more and more obvious, not just to non-JWs and ex-JWs, but it's going to be harder and harder for current JWs to actually avoid this. It will be everywhere in the media, and more people will see this. And so they're causing the problem themselves. If they were just open and actually admitted that they had problems and then tried to solve the problems, they wouldn't have this issue. But they are what they are, and they're showing themselves up for exactly what they are.
Indeed. And thank you for highlighting some of those issues with the document. Again, I should have preempted Covert in saying that there will be an article on JW Survey analysing this document in more detail, because it is interesting, not just what's said, but what isn't said. And we now go to John Redwood. John, can you give us your concluding comments?
I'd love to, Lloyd. So for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to read passages from Barbara Anderson's new book, Barbara Anderson
Anyway,
Uncensored.
viewers, I hope you've enjoyed our episode of Watchtower and Focus.
So I do want to thank, I won't put anyone through that, but I do want to thank
I have a button in front of me that says stop broadcast, Redwood. So you just better watch
we'll continue it over on the John Redwood channel. But I do want to thank Covert for bringing up the fact that Barbara's book is excellent. It's a short read. It's not expensive at all, and it's available on Kindle. I have the pleasure of working with Barbara, and we have a CSA team, or child sexual abuse team, that meets every month. And one of the organizations that we formed is called SCARS, which is Stopping Child Abuse Advocates for Reform and Safety. So you're going to be hearing a lot more in the coming year or two about SCARS, which is going to be working in a very similar context to what Reclaim Voices is doing. And we're going to have separate chapters of that. We're developing a website right now, but we're also going to have SCARS/CA, which is California, which is where a lot of the initiatives are going to take place in the political realm. We have some really great people who are actually going to our representatives and are trying to advocate for change in various ways, such as extending the statute of limitations timelines, because they're not consistent in every state, and criminal and civil are different. So we'll be posting links as those sites become live. Right now, you can go to scars.ca on Facebook, and you can have a look at what's going on there with regards to the California legislation. We're about to go to the Attorney General of California, as well as the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and present our case for change in light of what's going on with child protection. So I just wanted to mention that and thank Barbara for everything that she's done. She's been she really is the embodiment of child protection, and she left the organization and lost everything because of her uncovering. She was the real original whistleblower when it came to the child protection policies of Watchtower and how they harmed so many children. So thanks to Barbara, and it's great being with all of you today, and look forward to being with you again.
Indeed, and I sense there will be a future Watchtower in Focus dedicated to what SCARS is doing. So stay tuned for that. all that remains is for me to really express not my thanks and the thanks of the whole team to you, Raymond, and to your colleagues at Reclaimed Voices for what I can safely say I believe is groundbreaking work that you're doing on behalf of victims in the Netherlands, and please do keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you on the show again in the future. But that's about all we have time for. Thank you to the, well, more than 250 people that are watching us now, and thanks to all of you who will be viewing once this live stream is over, which it will be momentarily. I now have to do this gracefully. I'm sorry we don't have the fancy end credits. I can only...
Don't sing us out. Don't sing us out.
Sorry, did you say you wanted me to sing us out?
No, someone push the button. Someone push the button.
But no, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to subscribe for future episodes of Watchtower in Focus. And as always, thank you for watching.